Hello. On a momentous day for the United Kingdom, I'm Philippa Thomas with BBC World News from Westminster. Our headlines. Britain's exit from the European Union begins. A letter signed by Prime Minister Theresa May will be delivered to the EU. That letter will be handed over in the next couple of hours by Britain's ambassador in Brussels, starting the clock on 2 years of negotiations. They've warned the UK can't have a better deal outside the Union. So how will the soon-to-be 27-member group respond? And Britain joined the EU more than 4 decades ago. We'll look back on what's been a sometimes rocky relationship. And the scene in Westminster as Prime Minister Theresa May finishes her morning meeting with her cabinet members. We'll keep you up to date through this historic day. Well, welcome to Westminster, where the letter has been signed, sealed, and it's on its way for delivery in Brussels at lunchtime. That letter has been signed by the British Prime Minister Theresa May. After its delivery, after this historic process begins, she will deliver a statement here in the House of Commons where she'll urge the UK to come together as it embarks on a momentous journey. Well, we're here through the day. We'll be talking to members of Parliament. We'll be hearing from the experts. We'll be hearing from people around the United Kingdom. First, this report from Alex Forsyth.
More than 4 decades ago, the UK first signed up to the then European Community. Today, those years of membership will start to come to an end. David Cameron's promise back in 2013 was key in getting to this point. He said Britain would get to choose whether to stay in or leave the European Union, hoping to end years of debate about the relationship.
It is time for the British people to have their say. It is time for us to settle this question about Britain and Europe.
So last year, politicians of all persuasions took to Britain's streets, making the case for leave and remain. Then in June, the country decided.
The British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
The consequences were immediate. For some, there was jubilation. For others, contemplation, even devastation. And for him, resignation.
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
The new Prime Minister pledged from the start to honour the referendum result.
Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
And that process will begin in earnest today, with a letter sent from here to Brussels formally saying the UK wants to leave the EU. Then some 2 years of negotiations will follow, with a whole host of issues to be resolved. Everything from the rights of EU citizens living here and elsewhere, to Britain's financial commitments to the EU and its future trading relationship. And there are decades of EU legislation and regulations that need to be unpicked. The process of leaving is unprecedented. It will be complex and at times uncertain. There'll be challenges and opportunities. And with the Prime Minister's signature on this letter, it all begins today. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, this is one side of this process, isn't it? Let's also take you to Brussels, where we can speak to the BBC's Dan Johnson. Dan, what's the mood? I don't suppose they're excited about this day.
No, there's a great deal of sadness here from European politicians. They regret Britain's decision to leave the EU, and although, of course, this is a momentous occasion, they are upset, really, that this is actually physically happening. A lot of them think that 2 years is not long enough to actually negotiate all the details of a deal that would be needed to see the UK smoothly leave the EU. They think that there will have to be a longer period in the negotiations. They think some transitional arrangements may be needed, and some some politicians here have even said the door is still open if Britain wants to rejoin later or even reconsider its decision throughout these negotiations. But the clock will start ticking at around lunchtime here when Sir Tim Barrow, the ambassador, actually hands over that letter. He's been the focus of attention this morning. There have been cameras chasing him around Brussels as he's got in his jag with his bag, and in that bag we think is a letter. He arrived here at the European Council a short time ago. He's got a few different meetings to go to this morning, and then he's got a small window in his diary at about lunchtime when he will actually physically hand the letter to the President of the Council, Donald Tusk, and that will be the moment that Article 50 is triggered, that Britain says we actually officially want to leave the EU, and that will be the start of the 2-year deadline for those negotiations to take place. After that, it probably goes quiet for a bit. We won't know exactly what's going on as the 27 other members of the EU all try and get their negotiating position lined up, ready to actually start the hard bargaining.
Dan, I'm intrigued by the hint in your answer there about this perhaps not being irrevocable. Is there any thought in our current partner states in the European Union that we might change our minds?
There's certainly a small number of people who think that's a possibility, and it's something they'd welcome. They want to say that the door is open, and if Britain wants to reconsider its decision throughout these negotiations or even afterwards, that it would be welcomed back. They've said that all along, a lot of politicians here. But at the same time, they want this negotiation to be tough. They think that Britain can't get an easy deal. One of the leaders in the European Parliament yesterday said Britain had a good deal already as a member of the EU. It had a rebate. They said an even better deal was on offer when David Cameron came here to negotiate before the referendum. So they say that sort of deal is not on offer now. Britain cannot cherry-pick what it is going to get from the EU. There is going to have to be a tough negotiation where these 27 remaining members of the EU all have a say about exactly what they want. It's going to be a long, hard negotiation in the 2 years to come.
Dan Johnson in Brussels. Long, hard negotiations to come. Norman Smith, who's in Parliament, is going to be watching a lot of that process, that tortuous process for us here. And Norman, just tell us what changes as a result of Article 50 being triggered. What's different tomorrow from the situation right now?
What changes, I think, is we move from, if you like, the promises phase of Westminster to the delivery phase, because up to now there may have been a lot of arguments, a lot of rancour, a lot of rows, but there's been no real imperative to actually produce anything concrete. Now we move into the actual negotiations. It is no longer sufficient simply to come up with ambitious projections of what Britain might enjoy after Brexit. We actually have to nail down some substantive details of what Brexit Britain is going to look like. And we know the broad outlines of what Theresa May is aiming for. We know, for example, that she wants to take back control of immigration. We know we can't remain a member of the single market or indeed the customs union. We know, too, that Mrs. May wants to end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. We know also she will have to pay a price to secure that. And that is where this gets interesting, the deals she is prepared to make. In particular, there'll be a lot of attention on money, whether she is prepared not just to pay a Brexit bill, but whether she is prepared to make financial contributions to ensure key sectors with the British economy, such as the car industry, such as financial services, can continue to have tariff-free access to the single market. Similarly, on immigration, yes, we know she wants to end free movement, but might there be some give on that? Could there potentially be preferential access for EU citizens? Similarly, on timescale, we know Theresa May wants Britain out by 2019, but if the negotiations get tricky, could there be a transitional period to buy a bit more time before we actually have to leave? That is the phase we're now entering. We're moving from rhetoric to reality.
Norman Smith, thank you very much. And Norman there talking about the bill for this. And it's one of the reasons that Brexit is so often referred to as a divorce. And I suppose the big question is, how grown up is this going to be? Is this going to be amicable, or is it going to be a really bitter breakup? Ben Wright takes a look at that question.
Brexit, Britain's divorce from the European Union. As seismic for the country as this marriage split, as closely watched as theirs, will it be as smooth as a conscious uncoupling? or will it be a bitter breakup instead? There is a lot to sort out, like money. The EU is likely to slap an exit bill on the table for money the UK's already promised to pay into EU coffers, and Brussels' opening bid could be as much as 50 billion quid. And where are the family going to live? Or more specifically, EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU. Are they going to be able to stay where they are? And what rights will they have? Both sides say they want this bit of the divorce deal sorted out pretty quickly. OK, so we're splitting up, but what sort of future relationship are we going to have? How will the UK and the EU do business? A full new trade agreement between the two is going to take years to figure out. But if there is a divorce deal, that might help smooth over the split. This is also a divorce with a deadline. There are just 2 years to hammer this out, and the clock starts ticking now.
With me here on College Green, waiting for that moment in history to arrive. Two journalists from two of Britain's biggest newspapers, Heather Stewart from The Guardian, Chris Hope from The Daily Telegraph. Fair to say your readers have probably got pretty different views. Heather first, how do they feel about Brexit, and is this a day to rejoice or despair?
Well, I think our readers are probably feeling quite discombobulated. We know and quite a lot of them were pro-Remain, probably quite grief-stricken, very confused about what comes next. And our front page this morning was a sort of symbolic jigsaw puzzle with, you know, the piece of Great Britain leaving the rest of Europe, not geographically, of course, but it is a puzzle, quite what our relationship is going to be, and I think that's...
So some concern there. You're looking a bit happier, Chris.
No concern at the Telegraph. As you can see, we believe that we'll unite behind Britain will unite behind Brexit, says Theresa May. And there's your picture there of her signing that key letter. So that's a positive thing for your readers. Yeah, we see it as we're leaving a trading zone with some rules. We're putting them behind us. We're staying, unlike The Guardian, we think we're staying in Europe, but we're not part of the EU. It's a completely different thing. I think it's wrong to say we're leaving Europe. We're leaving the European Union. Completely different thing altogether. And you know, our readers, one of our today writes in saying, "I'll raise a mug of tea at midday today when we leave Europe." So European Union. So. Right. That's how we market in Telegraph.
So Guardian readers, what would they say to that thought? Too much fuss being made here.
Well, so some of our readers are absolutely pro-Brexit. There's perfectly, you know, there's a legitimate left-to-centre argument for leaving the EU. But I think a lot of them are feeling very uncertain, and it's a time of great uncertainty. And so we find huge appetite among readers, online in particular, for any kind of analysis and information that we can give them about the choices that lie ahead, because I think it is going to be, it's very uncertain. It's going to be quite complex, I think.
What is the thought about hard Brexit and soft Brexit? Chris, do you think that's a useful distinction, the idea that hard Brexit, we just really fall out?
We prefer clean Brexit. Okay. Hard, it was first coined, I think, by George Osborne in the day after the referendum last July, and he did that for a reason, I think. It sounds like a punch, or it hurts. There's no reason why it could be more like a clean incision, a clean operation taking us out of Europe. Less a punch than a clean cut. I think that's how we see it. And I think it'll be a good thing as we find, I think, what they mean by hard or by clean is stopping free movement coming here, so taking us out of the single market and the customs union. Heather's right, it's going to be some kind of uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty, we hate uncertainty, EU nationals living here hate uncertainty, but gradually that will become quite clear over 2 years.
Stopping free movement. I mean, that was a huge part of the campaign, Heather, and a lot of people have said since they voted for Brexit because they didn't want other European nationals to be able to freely come here.
Yeah, and indeed, I think the polling shows that even quite a few of those people who voted Remain still had concerns about levels of immigration. And I don't necessarily think it has to mean closing the door, but you'll find that parliamentarians, you know, across quite a big sort of swathe of the political spectrum, read that vote as a kind of comment on free migration and the idea that that had to be controlled or constrained in some way.
What about the NHS, though, for example? I mean, if you go into a GP surgery or a hospital in Britain, you'll find people who are here from Poland, from the Czech Republic, from France, from the Republic of Ireland. Do they get to stay?
I think the hope is they will be staying. Theresa May says the big thing is 1.5 million EU nationals who are here should be allowed to stay. And in fact, on the Question Time programme on Monday night, David Davis said we should look at them as a cohort of 4 million people, 2.5 million, all the Brits and EU as one group together, and see if they can be treated as one group. I mean, you know, in terms of the money going back to the NHS, well, that was a big debate. The big number on the through £350 million. The thought is that when the CAP money is brought back here, some of that could be given.
Agricultural money.
Yeah, so that's the biggest lump of money.
Please, your readers who are farmers, will it, Chris? Goodness me.
Well, the thought is that when that comes back to the UK, we can decide how some of that is spent and may go towards the NHS. That's what certainly a senior MP has been saying recently.
I think that brings us back to the point that Heather was making about uncertainty. Chris and Heather, you're busy. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us here on BBC World News. And they're right, we don't know the answers to lots of questions. We do have lots of questions, and we'll be asking them on your behalf through the day. We will also, in the next few minutes, be live in Paris and Berlin to find out to get you some European perspectives on just what's happening here at Westminster. Stay with us.
The Indian biotechnology sector has actually seen a metamorphosis. Today, Indian vaccine industry caters to 73 countries and a birth cohort of more than 70 million children.
We have the trained capital to be able to say not only can we do this for India, but we can also do this in India for the rest of the world.
The governments have come out with norms in which they will process your applications. They are applying Digital India first in the regulatory regime. That cuts the time of approvals a lot shorter, and products are able to reach the market much sooner. This is the time to invest in India and look at biotechnology as a sector.
Welcome back to Westminster. This is the day when Prime Minister Theresa May makes it official. The UK will be leaving the European Union. She will be triggering so-called Article 50, marking the beginning of negotiations for our formal exit in 2 years' time. Obviously, a huge story, a momentous day for us on this side of the channel. Let's get you some European perspectives. First, we can go to Lucy Williamson in Paris. And Lucy, how is this day being seen where you are?
Well, I think if you take the front page of the Libération newspaper this morning, there's a big picture of a man in a bearskin hat, and the headline is, "We miss you already," and then in small print, "or maybe not." And I think there's a real sense here of unease about what's happening. France has traditionally been quite wary about negotiating with Britain on EU matters. It's seen that the Brits always somehow manage to have their cake and eat it. And amongst most of the candidates who are running for president here, of course, it'll be the next president that actually handles these negotiations for France. Among most of the candidates, there's a sense that they're not going to let that happen this time for a couple of reasons, really. One is that most of the candidates, and I leave Marine Le Pen to one side, most of the candidates are keen to avoid a contagion. They don't want to encourage the sense that a Frexit might be a good idea for France. And also, France has things to gain. It has things to gain, for example, if companies decide to move their financial operations from the City of London to Paris. There's been talk about that here in the newspapers over the past few months. So, as I say, most of the candidates have taken quite a tough line, saying no financial passport, you know, you can't pick and choose, you can't be in and out, you can't have a better deal out than you had when you were in. Marine Le Pen is a different case. She is pro pulling France out of the euro. She wants to completely renegotiate the deals on border controls and perhaps have a referendum on a Frexit. If she manages to make it to the Elysee Palace, it's still unlikely, but if she manages to do that, she will be a much, much softer negotiating partner for the UK.
And just to pick up on what you were saying there, Lucy, the idea that France might leave the euro, the idea of Eurosceptic contagion. I mean, does that have much public support? Have there been polls about whether France should stay in the euro or not?
There have been polls about this, which of course we take with the usual pinch of salt. It seems that a majority of people do not want to leave the EU in France, and the emotional relationship that French people have, many of them, with the EU is different to the UK because of its history, because of its place in the continent. There are some people who want to leave. There are some people who are deeply frustrated by the way Brussels works. But the idea of leaving is a much bigger rupture for many people here than it has been for the UK.
Lucy, thank you. Lucy mentioned, of course, that we have the presidential elections in France coming up. If we go now to Berlin, Jenny Hill is there for us. There are elections in Berlin in a few months' time. And so it is all intensely political, even the reaction to our big day, isn't it, Jenny?
Yes, of course, although I think you'll find that, I mean, the elections come September at the moment look as though there'll be a two-horse race between Angela Merkel and Martin Schulz, both of whom, of course, are firmly pro the EU and certainly don't want to see it fall apart. Nevertheless, they will, of course, have an eye to the public mood here. The public mood when it comes to Brexit is, I think, still one of puzzlement, actually. The majority of Germans still don't really understand why Britain wants out. One newspaper headline this morning put it, this is Britain's leap into the dark. There is, perhaps of all the EU member states, the most sadness here at Britain's decision to leave, and a lot of concern because, of course, the UK is Germany's fifth most important trading partner. There are a huge number of business links between the two countries. Bilateral ties are very, very important. Bear in mind, too, that politically, the UK was very much a German ally within the EU. There is a real sense that everything is going to change. In terms of Angela Merkel's position when it comes to these negotiations, I think whilst she's remained very tight-lipped on this, I think you can expect a number of things. First of all, she wants the EU, the remaining 27 member states, to come up with a consolidated position. She doesn't want individual countries negotiating on their own with Britain. Secondly, there is the issue of trade, how that relationship is going to pan out. Mrs. Merkel will have to tread a fine line between keeping German manufacturers, particularly the car manufacturers, happy, whilst ensuring that other countries like France don't start to head for the EU exit too. And thirdly, there is this issue of the so-called Brexit bill, whether Britain is prepared to pay what the EU says it owes in terms of financial commitments over the coming years, regardless of its decision to leave. We don't know what Angela Merkel herself makes of that, but we have heard a lot from her rather outspoken finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, who's made it clear that he thinks that Britain should pay its dues, if you like. There is a lot of speculation here. When you speak to ministers, MPs across the political spectrum, of course, their opinions range from Britain should be punished for leaving to let's try and ensure we have a good relationship with Britain. But I do think, first and foremost, Angela Merkel will try to ensure that that relationship continues to be strong. At the same time, she wants to ensure that the EU remaining 27 member states continue to thrive.
Jenny Hill in Berlin, thank you very much. We're just going to show you the scene live in Downing Street, where the occupant, Theresa May of 10 Downing Street, is going to have a very busy day ahead and a rather momentous couple of years as she oversees these negotiations. Let me introduce you to Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government here, because Jill, I know you've worked as a senior civil servant in the Treasury, you know how government works, and so I want to put to you, what happens next? Tomorrow, for example, we've got a white paper being published. What's it about?
So tomorrow the government says it's going to publish a white paper about its so-called Great Repeal Bill. That's this big piece of legislation it's going to bring forward to effectively repeal the European Communities Act, so the act that took us into the EU. But then what it has to do is transfer all that European law into UK law and adjust it where it depends on things in Europe that we can't depend on after Brexit. So that's a very big legislative task of getting us ready for the day after we leave.
And that sounds abstract, doesn't it? But it matters for all sorts of things. Air pollution, the state of our beaches, farming, all sorts of things that are going to matter in day-to-day life.
So it matters enormously. The really important thing is giving us sort of legal certainty, so people know what rules are applying the day after we leave. So what they're trying to do actually is minimise change. So the government has said that actually in this Great Repeal Bill their aim is to replicate as near as possible what is currently in what the Europeans call the acquis, so that whole body of law. The problem is it's a body of law that's grown up over the past 4 decades of membership that you've been mentioning.
And also, one of the points of leaving the European Union, according to the campaign, was to give Westminster more power. It was about British democracy as opposed to the EU. And many MPs are saying, well, hang on, if we just take all these laws back into British law and sign them over, we don't really have time to think about it very much.
So there are two distinct things, one of which is how far will Parliament really be able to get involved in the Great Repeal Bill, or whatever it ends up really being called. The government has said that it's going to take quite extensive powers to do things in secondary legislation. Those are sort of processes where actually Parliament has to say yes or no quite quickly. It doesn't get to scrutinise it in the way it gets to scrutinise normal legislation. Then Parliament's a bit worried that that government may use that to railroad things through, and they're saying this is about taking back control. Actually, you know, maybe this is taking back control to Whitehall and the government rather than to Parliament. The second thing, though, obviously, once we've brought all that into UK law, we then can amend things here in Westminster rather than have to depend on agreement with Europe. How much freedom we have, though, will depend on the terms of deals we negotiate with Europe and with all our other trading partners, ultimately.
And Jill, behind the scenes, this is a huge amount of work. I mean, is Whitehall now on a hiring binge? Are we looking for a lot more civil servants?
Well, what was really interesting is we've actually, over the last 5-6 years, seen Whitehall go to its smallest levels since the Second World War. So basically the story, 2010 to 2016, almost a referendum day, was losing civil servants. The story since then has been a bit of a reverse gear. So yes, we have seen the creation of 2 new government departments, the Department for Exiting the EU, the Department for International Trade. Both of them are hiring people, but so are other departments. They're trying to reverse some of those changes.
And I have to jump in there and say, Jill, thank you very much. And we're just going to end this programme showing you the scene in Downing Street. I think, Larry, the cat is on the doorstep there at number 10, looking very calm, but around him a huge amount of activity. And we'll keep you up to date on everything that's happening throughout the day. Stay with us on BBC World News.
It's very quiet across Europe at the moment. We've got high pressure dominating the scene. That's why you can see on the pressure chart just how influential that area of high pressure is, covering quite a swathe of the continent. We do have a very weak area of low pressure across the eastern Mediterranean. That's generating some showers around the Greek islands, maybe in towards southwest Turkey, and a few bit further eastwards into the Levant. Meanwhile, we've got a weather front pushing in towards Ireland and the British Isles gradually over the next few days, so conditions will be turning wetter and windier here. For Spain and Portugal, though, plenty of sunshine around, pretty decent temperatures by day. Same too for much of central southern France. A little bit further northwards, though, we'll see the clouds tending to build up, and a wetter affair there for British Isles and Ireland. Some rain there across the Low Countries into northern Germany, northern Poland, into Denmark. Still quite chilly, though, across Norway and Sweden. Temperatures here in low single figures, for example, in Stockholm. That weather front continues to move eastwards to bring some wetter weather even in towards the northwest of France, into the Low Countries as we head on towards Thursday and Friday. But much of Europe, again, quiet thanks to high pressure. Still on the cool side there in Athens, 18 degrees. Warming up, though, in Rome with a high of 22 Celsius. So for Friday and Saturday, the temperatures will drop a little bit in London and Paris as the clouds and wind and rain move in from the west. Pleasantly warm in Rome, again, temperatures in the low 20s Celsius. Turning warmer in Berlin by the time we reach the weekend. Still on the fresh side in Athens, but at least bright with some sunshine.